Absolutely.
Guys like Dick Dunn and others were,
Sure.
at that time were very popular guys. He was the mayor of Dearborn Heights. And,
Right.
and he won. He ended up being chief of the Wayne Circuit Court for a long time.
Okay, so now you start out, you're 2 years along as a circuit judge, and then all of a sudden, 1976, one of the incumbent Democratic state Supreme Court justices kind of runs afoul of his party power structure. And can you tell us a little bit about what happened?
Oh, you remember that?
I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember that. What happened?
Yeah, Giles Kavanaugh had been the party nominee for the Democratic Party for the Supreme Court, and he was there, and he was up for re-election, and he had made some rulings or some, I don't know the reason why, but the Democratic Party was not happy with him, so they were looking for another nominee. And I had been elected a circuit judge with significant votes, and so at the partisan meetings, at the nomination, they nominated me to run for the Supreme Court. The concept was that Kavanaugh could, by just filing an affidavit, run again, and he did when he didn't get party designation.
And of course, then you run on the general election ballot without any kind of partisan designation.
Exactly.
So nobody knows who nominated who. They just know beneath his name it says Justice of the Supreme Court.
You've got it, yeah. The idea was, the strategy was that if the Democrats could get a third, the Republicans get a third, and Kavanaugh get a third, that I could slip in with any luck. Well, I did my share. I pulled over a third of the total population. On the Republican side, they had a fellow named Swallow. And I know him well. He's a good guy, but
Yeah.
he did not get much support. So
Joe Swallow.
Joe Swallow, a nice guy.
He became an Alpena circuit judge.
Correct,
Right.
yeah. And I see him from time to time
Right.
in judicial
Right.
functions. And so he was the Republican nominee, and there was Kavanaugh. So Kavanaugh won. He took the majority, and that's all he needed.
There were two other Supreme Court races that year, and they were all slotted. Do you remember that? Jim Ryan had been appointed to the court. Did you know Jim Ryan?
Oh, sure.
And he was a justice. He was running for re-election. And then you had Larry Lindemer, the former Republican State Party chairman. Did you know Larry Lindemer?
No, but I knew who he was.
You knew who he was.
Yeah.
And Blair Moody, your fellow Wayne County Circuit Judge, ran against Lindemer in the same race as yours and beat him.
Yeah, right.
You know, so it was a heck of a year. And you had Don Regal versus Dick Austin in a primary that year for the U.S. Senate. Did you remember that?
No, I didn't remember that.
Phil Hart.
Regal opposed, and Austin were opponents?
In a primary.
I'll be
primary that same year. And then you had Ford versus Carter. That was a pretty exciting time. So even though you lost that race, you were still on the circuit court.
Right.
And you serve until, like, what, 82? And then you run for Court of Appeals.
Yeah, the Court of Appeals was broader responsibility, of course, and being a circuit judge, I enjoyed it, and I had been there for about 8 years, and it really got to a point where, you know, it's like punching the clock. In order, as a trial judge, you have to be there at 9 o'clock and work till 4 o'clock because you got a jury or a lot of witnesses lined up,
right.
And it's like punching like clockwork. And the idea of oral arguments for the Court of Appeals and writing opinions by that time appealed to me. So when there was an opening, Nate Kaufman, his term was up. He was too old to run again, so there was an opening. And there were 5 running for that slot, and I was one of the 5. Geraldine Ford, a Recorder's Court judge, was also running. She and I were
Bledsoe Ford?
Yeah, right. And she was nominated, and I was nominated. And she had me. I think I had about 75,000 votes in the primary. She had about 95,000. And then in the general election,
You flipped it.
Yeah, I beat her.
That's tough to do.
Well, it was her main strength was in the city of Detroit.
The city of Detroit.
And, and the area for the Court of Appeals included at that time 4 counties: Wayne,
oh sure,
Lexington,
right.
Livingston County,
right.
and Monroe, and so the base was broader, and my name was better known than
right.
hers, and among other things. I got the job.
Okay.
And ever since then, I was reelected without opposition.
Without
I'm happy
opposition.
To say. Yeah.
Where was your office when you were on the
First
Court of
Federal
Appeals?
Building.
How did you like the job of being an appellate judge rather than a circuit judge?
Oh, I liked it very much because you would really be the final word in a given case. And there was great freedom. You could read more and write more, and the time frames were very flexible. That is to say, we have oral arguments 2 or 3 days a month. Rest of the time you're in the office reading and writing. Reading the brief, drafting opinions. And I have a right arm clerk at my elbow, and they have research staff for the systems. So it's a good operation. The Court of Appeals is, for the state of Michigan, has been and continues to be run
Right.
very well.
Right.
Very well.
Well, you lived in the city of Detroit until when?
Oh, 15 years ago.
15, and that's when you moved to Northville?
I live in Northville, and I live there now. Yeah.
Okay. So you were living in the city of Detroit in addition to being a judge there until 15 years ago, the
Correct.
early 90s.
Right. Yeah. I lived in Rosedale Park, which was a nice community. Mm-hmm. They had a community center right within that complex of homes. It was built many years ago. The home I moved into had to be built in 1925, but it had 4 bedrooms. I had 5 kids, and the community center schools were nearby. My girls went to Mercy High School. My son went to Catholic Central. Mm-hmm. They all had good grade school training in the public arena at that time. And I'm sorry to say the public school system is not what it
used to be.
Yeah.
Is your brother still alive?
No, he passed away about 12 years ago.
Oh,
My
I'm
brother
sorry to hear
became a Maryknoll missionary. They're an order of priests that would go to other countries. And he was assigned after his ordination to go to Bolivia, South America. And he spent a year in learning the language, and they would go there on the edge of the jungle, build a new parish, and serve the people. And then over the years, the jungle would go away. They'd have new areas, new towns. He was a builder. He'd be in one parish for about 5-6 years, build a church and a school maybe. And so he had a very successful life. He spent 42 years down there in Bolivia, different areas of it, and he's buried down there. And he was very, very popular.
That's amazing.
Yeah. My wife and I went down for the funeral. Of course, they held a funeral. They held it up. Normally, they bury him the next day, or at least they held it up so we could get there. We got there, but he went. They had services for him in the one city. The next day, he went to the other city where he had services, and the third day went back to the parish that he first started. And most cities in South America, there's a big park, and around the park is the church on one side, the city hall, sort of. And it was amazing to the funeral. He was so well liked, and there were just thousands of people. They had the funeral on the steps of the church.
Wow.
And the place was just crowded with people. And interesting, I'll never forget this, when they picked him up after the Mass and carried the body around, people wanted to touch the casket as he went around. And then he was buried in a little plaque next to the church in that town. And
that's amazing.
It is amazing.
Well, it's a great tribute to him.
And I think that every priest in Bolivia came there. There must have been 45, 50 priests there.
Ooh,
yeah,
that's amazing. How long was he in Bolivia altogether?
42 years.
42 years. Unbelievable.
Yeah,
what a story.
He's a great